Once upon a time, in a kingdom very far away, there lived a king named Edward and a queen named Isabella. King Edward was handsome and kind. Everybody loved King Edward. But the real ruler of the kingdom was Queen Isabella. Before Queen Isabella became queen, she worked in the castle kitchen. Queen Isabella was very poor, but she was also very beautiful, funny, and very good at Scrabble. So King Edward fell in love with Queen Isabella and married her. King Edward loved Queen Isabella very much. But Queen Isabella was always afraid that King Edward would meet someone more beautiful. Fortunately, Queen Isabella possessed a magic mirror. The mirror could see everything and knew everything. Every day, Queen Isabella gazed into the mirror and asked, "Magic mirror on the wall, who is the most beautiful of all?" The mirror responded, "You are, my Queen Isabella. You are the most beautiful woman in the whole world." Queen Isabella felt happiness, confident that no one in the world was as beautiful as she was. One day, everything changed. Queen Isabella stood in front of the mirror and asked her usual question, "Magic mirror on the wall, who is the most beautiful of all?" And the mirror replied, "You are very beautiful, Queen Isabella. But the most beautiful woman in the world is Snow White." Queen Isabella was shocked. "Who is this Snow White?" she asked the mirror. "Snow White works in the castle kitchen. She has hair as black as night, lips as red as roses, and skin as white as snow. As of 8 a.m. this morning, she is a wee bitty bit more beautiful than you." "Rrgggg," yelled Queen Isabella. Queen Isabella stomped her feet, pulled her hair, then sat down and sobbed. The queen exclaimed, "I will lose everything." Fear gripped the queen, and that fear turned the queen's heart cold and hard. The queen summoned a trusted hunter to her chamber. "Find the girl, Snow White," the queen commanded. "Take her far, far away. Take her deep into the woods." Then the queen gazed intently into the hunter's eyes. "She must never come back." The hunter located Snow White and led her into the forest. Upon reaching the deepest, darkest part of the forest, the hunter halted. "Go," the hunter whispered. "Run fast and far, and don't ever go home." Snow White watched the hunter disappear. "Well, Snow White can't go home now," Snow White muttered. Snow White looked around at the dark and silent forest. It started to rain. "But Snow White can't stay here either." "Okay, feet, let's go." Snow White ran and ran. Snow White ran across a stream, up a hill, and down into a dark valley. Snow White ran all morning. By midday, Snow White's pale skin and rosy cheeks were covered in mud and scratches. By early afternoon, Snow White's long black hair was full of sticks and leaves. By night, Snow White was not beautiful anymore. Snow White felt exhausted, famished, and trembling from the cold. Suddenly, Snow White caught a whiff of wood smoke in the air. Intrigued by the scent, Snow White followed it and discovered a cottage nestled in the woods. A warm, golden glow emanated from the windows. Snow White knocked on the door. "Hello?" Snow White called out. "Is anyone home?" Silence followed her inquiry. With curiosity guiding her, Snow White pushed the door open and stepped inside. Inside the cottage, 7 tiny beds, 7 tiny chairs, and a roaring fire greeted Snow White. A large table lay cluttered with dirty dishes. Snow White's hunger and thirst grew more pronounced. Snow White found some bread and ate the whole loaf. Snow White found some milk and drank the whole bottle. Then Snow White sat in front of the fire to get warm. And just like that, Snow White fell asleep. When Snow White woke up, there were 7 dwarfs standing around her. Snow White rubbed her eyes. "Who are you?" Snow White asked. "This is our house," one dwarf said, angrily. "Who are you?" another dwarf asked. "Shoo, you'll scare her," another dwarf said. "She's a giant. She scares me." Yet another dwarf said. "Can I stay with you?" Snow White asked. "It seems I can't go home." The 7 dwarfs whispered amongst themselves. "Okay," the first dwarf agreed. "But only if you help us wash the dishes. We hate washing dishes." "It's a deal," Snow White replied. And so, Snow White found a new home with the 7 dwarfs. Every morning, Snow White washed the dishes. As the 7 dwarfs left for work each morning, they reminded Snow White, "Be careful. Don't open the door for anyone. And thank you for washing the dishes. We really hate washing dishes." Meanwhile, back at the castle, Queen Grimhild was feeling better. Queen Isabella thought that Snow White was gone forever. However, a small sense of fear lingered within Queen Isabella. "Come and play Scrabble with me, my love," shouted King Edward from the bottom of the stairs. "You can go first." "Maybe later, dearest," replied Queen Isabella. Queen Isabella stood in front of her magic mirror. "Magic mirror on the wall, who is the most beautiful of all?" The mirror replied, "You are very beautiful, my queen. But the girl, Snow White, is the most beautiful woman in the world." "Snow White is alive," shouted Queen Isabella. The queen shouted in frustration. "She is living with the 7 dwarfs in the forest," the mirror responded. "Last night, she was not very beautiful. But as of 1 p.m. today, she is more beautiful than you." "Rats!" the queen exclaimed. The queen went to her closet and retrieved her old coat and old boots. "I'll have to kill her myself." The queen ran out of the palace, jumped into the fastest carriage, and sped off towards the forest. Meanwhile, Snow White was reading beside the fire when there was a knock on the door. "Knock! Knock!" Snow White peeked through the window. There was a woman holding a basket of fruit. The woman had a beautiful face, but the woman was wearing an old dress and old boots. "Fruit! Fresh fruit! Apples and bananas and pears and oranges. Oh, Snow White wants some fruit," thought Snow White. The woman saw Snow White through the window. "Hello, dear," said the woman. "Do you want some fruit? I have delicious apples today." "I love apples," said Snow White. But Snow White is not supposed to open the door for anyone. Snow White thought that the apples might be poisoned. The woman responded, "Oh, how silly." The woman then cut an apple in half. "Here. You can taste half, and I will eat the other half. That way you know it's not poisoned." Snow White opened the door. The woman gave 1/2 of the apple to Snow White and ate the other half. When Snow White saw the woman eating the juicy apple, Snow White's mouth watered. Snow White couldn't stop herself and took a big bite of the apple. Almost immediately, Snow White fell to the ground. The apple was poisoned, but only on 1/2. Queen Isabella sighed with relief. Quickly, Queen Isabella got back into her carriage and rode back to the castle. When the 7 dwarfs arrived home, they found Snow White lying on the floor. The 7 dwarfs yelled in Snow White's ears. The 7 dwarfs tickled Snow White's feet. The 7 dwarfs poured cold water on Snow White's face. But Snow White didn't wake up. "Is Snow White dead?" asked one dwarf. "Snow White doesn't seem to be alive," said a second. And so, the 7 dwarfs made a glass coffin for their beloved friend, Snow White. The 7 dwarfs set the glass coffin on a table in a beautiful part of the forest, surrounded by flowers. Snow White lay there for over a year, through spring, summer, autumn, and winter. One day, a prince named Henry from a different kingdom was walking through the forest with his dog, Max. Henry saw Snow White's strange glass coffin. Henry brushed off the leaves and saw Snow White inside. Just then, Henry tripped over Max and knocked the coffin off the table. Snow White rolled out of the coffin and onto the grass. "Oh no! Oh dear! Oh, fiddlesticks!" Henry shouted. But then an amazing thing happened. The piece of poisoned apple that was stuck in Snow White's throat fell out, and Snow White began to cough. The prince rushed to help Snow White. "Apples," Snow White coughed. "I beg your pardon?" the prince asked. "No more apples," Snow White exclaimed. That night, Queen Isabella stood in front of the magic mirror and asked her question. "Magic mirror on the wall, who is the most beautiful of all?" To Queen Isabella's surprise, the mirror responded, "You are very beautiful, my queen. But Snow White is again the most beautiful woman in the world." "Where?" Queen Isabella screamed. In her anger, Queen Isabella picked up a shoe and threw it at the mirror. The mirror shattered into 1,000 pieces, releasing the magic contained within. "And oh!" screamed Queen Isabella. Queen Isabella collapsed on the floor and fell into a deep sleep. While Queen Isabella slept, she experienced a strange dream. In her dream, Queen Isabella danced in hot iron shoes. Her feet burned and burned, but Queen Isabella couldn't stop dancing. When Queen Isabella finally woke up from this terrible dream, it was morning. The sun shone brightly, and Queen Isabella felt different. The magic mirror's spell had been broken, so Queen Isabella no longer felt anxious or jealous. Queen Isabella felt free. Queen Isabella went downstairs to find King Edward. Queen Isabella really wanted to play Scrabble, and she wondered what had happened to Snow White. The 7 dwarfs were very happy to see Snow White alive. The dwarfs invited Prince Henry for dinner. When Prince Henry learned that the dwarfs did not like washing dishes, Prince Henry bought them a dishwasher. Everyone lived happily ever after.